Nell was feeling her nerves, and so was the baby. It seemed that she was leaving civilization and going to a place where life was possibly lived the same way it had been for the last couple of 100 years. As Motley drove, she noticed lots of open spaces and scattered buildings on the landscape, and she admired the countryside. It was indeed a beautiful sight. The baby kicked, and she was not sure whether it was nerves or excitement at the prospect of something new and unknown. She was to meet the most important and influential woman in Motley's life, and she was nervous about how that first encounter was going to be. Motley was listening to the radio station on which people were speaking Sesotho, his home language, and apparently the language she needed to master when this period was over and she returned to be with Motley as her husband. Motley, you have been very secretive about your grandmother. Why is that? She asked him, trying to inject a light tone so as not to let on that her nerves were strung tightly. He looked at her bulging abdomen and laughed impishly. Wouldn't you like to know? Seriously though, Nell, my grandmother is the sweetest person on the planet. I mean, if Dira survived her, I am more than confident that you two will get along swimmingly. He laughed with glee, and she scowled at him. Men, she thought. It was like they were living on a totally different planet, and they certainly had no communication skills whatsoever. Everything was a joke to them. She thought. She had sometimes heard Dira make that sound and had decided to adopt it for herself. She hoped that it would make her sound more like them if she used expressions that were typically used by the Basotho on the people she would come across on a regular basis. She had learned a few things from Dira and Zeko while she'd listened to them talk, pretending not to be bothered by the fact that she did not understand a word they said. Oh, how they seemed to enjoy doing that to her. She was going to show them. By the time she was done with the Makoti traditional thing that all Basotho men's new wives needed to do, she would be as fluent as they are. The sounds were just so difficult to mimic though. Dira would simply have to be her ears for a while, just until she got the hang of things and was familiar with the sounds of the most used phrases. They came to a town, and Motley stopped to put some petrol into the car. The smell of it made her want to vomit, so she waddled to the nearby supermarket and asked for the restroom. The baby must weigh a ton or two. It was so heavy already, and she was still only in her second trimester. The doctor had said that the baby's heartbeat sounded strange, but it was nothing to worry about. Of course, it was easy for him to say that, seeing that, even if the baby was overweight, he would not be the one carrying all that excess weight for months. Aside from the heaviness, her pregnancy had not been at all an unpleasant experience. She had read that some people had difficult pregnancies and had worried about all those things other women had spoken of experiencing while pregnant. The cravings she had, and suspected might be the reason for her baby being so heavy, was for flour-based edibles. The funny thing was that although her feet were swollen and her midsection bulging, she had lost weight in other parts of her body, like from her thighs and buttocks. Even her face seemed somewhat hollow, as though she was sucking her cheeks in. The doctor had assured her that it was normal in some women to lose weight or gain none at all, except for the weight of the baby during pregnancy, although it was more rare to lose than to gain or stay the same. When she returned to the car, Motley had bought her some of the donut-like buns that she had come to love so much and about which he knew all too well. They called them by some local Sesotho name, which escaped her at the moment. She just knew that it started with a D. You remember what we call these? He asked her, as if he had read her mind. She smiled sheepishly and shook her head no. He seemed to be enjoying himself at her expense with that silly grin on his face. Mwah! Aren't you going to tell me then? He laughed. It just seemed to amuse him so much when she got angry and used mwah to express it. Now, my love, there's no need to get snippy. This is the last time I'm going to tell you though, so you'd better listen and remember. He looked at her for a response and she just glared at him. Inside she was thinking, Mister, you are towing a thin line here. Alright. Kidibeku. Di beku. Practice it because you will need to say it right before you can get some. That's what I will be asking my grandmother to ensure before she lets you have any. He grinned again. It's a good incentive, don't you think? She lunged at him and, instead of ducking, he braced himself and caught her face with his hands and kissed her. Grrr, she thought. He just knows how to work me, doesn't he? She pouted and he took the hint and gave her the goodies. He then pulled out and they were once again on the road. She fell asleep not long after she had filled up with some food. Motley was thinking about the time he had been on the same road, with a different passenger then, and how that passenger had chatted him up as if she was afraid of the silence. She had avoided any one-on-one with him after he had found out that not only had Eve and she been together, she was pregnant with his child. What a shock that had been. Sweet little Dira knocked up. He would not have believed it had he not heard it with his own ears and seen it with his own eyes. He had to admit, though, that he had wanted to punch Eve in the gut for doing that to her. But when he saw how she became teary-eyed at the thought of them fighting, he decided not to upset her by beating up her lover. Eve had been all too happy to leave the house the following day. Dira had been so emotional following his departure that he had hastened his plans to send her to his grandmother's. Nell was snoring, he realized, which meant she was not sleeping comfortably. That was the only time she snored, when she was not sleeping properly. He pulled to the side of the road and put the car in neutral, while he lowered the seat into a reclining position. The effects were immediately heard as her breathing quieted down. Shoo, he thought. She sure sounded like a wild animal when she did that. She was carrying his first child and, save for the big belly and the swollen feet, she was even more beautiful than he remembered her ever having been. He hadn't told his grandmother about her condition and wondered how she was going to react to this realization. It would make 2 pregnant women whom he had placed at her doorstep in less than a year. His divorce had been finalized 2 months back, and Eleazar had been amicable about the whole situation, not fighting him about it and giving him what he had wanted. He remembered the day he had spoken to her about it. She had looked so fragile. He had almost lost his nerve. It had been the thought of not being with his Nell that had spurred him on to be brave and trust that she would not shatter into pieces at the news. Her reaction had not helped matters any. It had almost been like she had expected it and had already resigned herself to the news. It was as though she had just been waiting for the formalities to be over and done with. She had gone to live at her mother's, and he hoped that things were working out for her. He had been just as much to blame for their fiasco of a marriage as she had been. He wondered what would have happened if he had not met Nell. Would I have stayed with Eleazar? He honestly did not know the answer to that. What was clear in his mind was that once he had met Nell, his marriage had gone from warm to tepid to freezing. He had not wanted to touch Eletzeha because he had felt like he was cheating on Nell by doing so, and the arrangement had made it that much easier for him not to be with her in that way, save for those occasions when guilt had eaten at him and he had done his duty as a husband. 5 years of wasting his life and clinging to flimsy excuses for not ending his already dead marriage. He had, at one point, hoped that he could use the fact that Nell was the recipient of his mother's heart as a reason for him not to allow himself to love her. But he had loved her despite everything. Even when he had said those mean things to her, he had known they were not what he believed. She would have loved him with her own weak heart if she had still possessed it, and she loved him with the heart she had now. He somehow always knew that she loved him. Otherwise, why would she have stayed around for 5 years, chasing a ghost but not doing a very convincing job of it? She had admitted as much to him one time when he'd asked her why she had stayed. He now knew that she had no need to work for him or stay there when she had a successful company back in England and did not need money. She was worth far more than he was. With their combined wealth, their descendants would have a stable legacy. He wished he could know if they were having a son or daughter. He hoped she was ready for what was ahead of her, because his grandmother would be her midwife when the time came. By the look of things, she should have already had the baby, but she was only almost 7 months pregnant. Man, that baby was big. Who did he take after? His mother? Nell was not petite at all, though these days the rest of her seemed to be disappearing somewhere, maybe going to that huge belly. He had never heard of women losing weight as a result of pregnancy. Quite the opposite, in fact. He had not been away from her except for the time when his father had been sick and he had left Eve in charge of the farm to go see how his father was doing. And he had taken her with him and had then left her at his father's to go back to the farm to send Eve on his way. He thought now of his friend who had since gone and had not even sent word as to what was going on with him. He was starting to worry about the effects that this was having on Dira. She was closer to full term as, according to the doctors, she was some weeks ahead of Nell. Of course, he had not seen her in months, and he had no idea how she was, save for those letters she wrote to him about her life there. At least she was enjoying getting to know their grandmother, who had mentioned to him in more than one letter what a wonderful thing he had done bringing Dira there. There was to be a ceremony for her in which she would be formally welcomed into the family. Their grandmother had said that it would have to be one ceremony that took care of things that should have been done at previous stages of her life. Most of them would now just be symbolic, since it would be inappropriate to perform them at her current age. Tseko was also to be included, as she had also not had hers done, because their father had practically raised her in secret. She had come to live out the rest of the year there, and had left for her final year studies at university 2 months before. She had not wanted to stay with their father, and had not felt ready to be on her own. Motley was glad that she had come to that conclusion on her own, as he would not have had it any other way. Dira had mentioned that Tseko fought a lot with their grandmother because she had mood swings and would sometimes refuse to wake up and would spend the whole day in bed. This their grandmother frowned upon, and at the beginning she would try to force her to wake up, resulting in Tseko crying for hours. Clearly, his sister still had a long way to go to recovering herself and living a normal life. Dira had also said that Tseko was getting more and more depressed with the advancing of Dira's pregnancy. He imagined that it would be hard to be reminded of something like that on a daily basis. Tsego had made no attempt to keep the communication lines between them open. Moatli was frustrated that he was always making the effort and she had made excuses every time he tried to meet with her to have a talk about how she was doing. He wished for those times when bank accounts were not used to give money to people, because that took away the need to physically meet with the person in order to give them money. Tsego could very well stay at the university and never come home for the entire year, and they would not even know if she was doing well or if she was struggling with something. It also seemed that, because of Nell's pregnancy, she was shutting her sisters out and only wanted to talk to Nell on the phone. How was he ever going to bring them together as a family again? Moatli was in deep thought as he drove up the hill and then down the winding road that led to the village where his beloved grandmother had spent all of her adult life. As he began to notice his surroundings once again, he marveled at the ingenuity that is human nature. He had not even noticed whether he was going the right way or not, since he had not paid much attention to the road. He had to admit that the Sesotho saying, "Tlwaelo e hlola kelello," was indeed profound in its simplicity. He saw the familiar sight that was the family's property and could also make out some familiar figures hiding from the fiery autumn sun. This was a good time of the year, as the harvest was at its best. Nell would surely enjoy the fruits of nature with her timely arrival. She might even forget that she had left the modern world behind. As though she knew he was thinking about her, Nell roused herself from slumber and attempted to stretch as she slowly moved her head to look around. "Where are we?" she asked. The time for reflection was over for now, and he surrendered himself to the onslaught that was about to follow. He waited until he had come to rest in front of the hut where the women were resting. "See for yourself," he said as he killed the engine. Nell peered at the women sitting in the shade of a hut and thought she saw a familiar face. She rubbed her eyes and looked some more. The smile that immediately assaulted his senses told him that Nell had certainly figured out where they were. He had an urge to kiss her, but thought the better of it. What would his grandmother say at such public displays of affection? Those sort of things were frowned upon here. He was thinking that Nell might start waddling like a duck towards Dira, so he decided to prevent that before it happened. "Nell, please bring the car seat up before you get out, and wait for me to come open the door and help you down." She just scowled at him, but obeyed. She was still struggling with the seat when he opened her car door. "Okay, leave it," he said, and proceeded to extend his arm to her for support. Nell was just so nervous, she did not know what to do, and all that Moatli was doing was simply annoying her and making her feel worse. She swiped his hand away and gestured for him to move out of her way. He obliged, seeing where this was going and not wanting their first arrival to be marred by a tiff. He had lived with these drastic mood swings long enough to spot them a distance away, and he had to admit to himself that he was getting quite adept at averting them. Dira saw this and decided to come and give moral support. As she tried to get up, her own bulging tummy made the whole thing hilarious, since she herself needed help to get to her feet. Moatli watched all this with amusement. His grandmother decided that she would have to be the one to put an end to all the madness. "Dula fatshe, Dira." Dira did as she was told and plopped back down. When Nell heard the order coming from the elderly lady, she froze in place and looked from Moatli to Dira, then to the grandmother. She was thinking that this first encounter was not starting off on the right foot. She felt the tears come to her eyes and looked down. Moatli sensed the shift in mood and knew it was safe to approach, as she was now emotional and would welcome his attentiveness. Moatli was able to now guide her to where the two women were leisurely resting in the shade. Moatli's grandmother thought the girl looked more pregnant than Dira, and searched in her mind for the reason she believed that Dira was a month ahead in her pregnancy. Dira, ho shabahala eka mosadi enwa wa Moatlhi o tlo pepa pele ho wena tje. Ha se wena ya itseng o bile mmeleng pele ho yena. Dira was not sure how to respond to this, as she did not know much about pregnancy, hers being a mystery to her even on that day. Since Moatlhi's grandmother did not whisper this question, her grandson heard it and felt that his grandmother was being unfair. Malifa was thinking that maybe these children were hiding something, or that the girl was going to have more than one baby. She had not helped with multiple births all these years, to now miss the signs that signaled one. She knew that her family had had more than two of them, with her having given birth to twin girls all those years ago. She decided to make her thoughts known to her grandson. Moatlhi, ngwana eo o lebelletse mafahla. That certainly had never come to his mind, Moatlhi thought. How was he going to answer his grandmother when he did not understand it himself? Nkgono, enwa ke Nell. Ha ke tsebe hore na o tlo ba le mafahla kapa re tseba ngwana a le mong, he said to his grandmother, and then turned to Nell. Nell, present him my grandmother, Nkgono Malifa. Nell extended her hand to the elderly woman, and Malifa met her hand with both hers. This made Nell feel like that was the first right thing she had done, but then she ruined it by saying the only Sesotho thing she could remember, Dibeko. Everyone but herself spontaneously laughed, and Nell was confused for a moment. Then she remembered that what she had said was totally inappropriate for the occasion, as it meant something food-related and was not the usual response at introductions. Immediately she was embarrassed, but at the same time relieved that the woman had not been offended and instead had found her funny. Nell started laughing too and crying at the same time. She wiped furiously at the tears while she laughed. Malifa invited Nell to sit down with them and instructed Moatlhi to unload their luggage and put it in the big house. Made from mud and rocks, this big house was another thatched structure but with 3 rooms. Moatlhi dumped the bags in the first room he walked into and hurried back to the women. He was worried about how his grandmother would handle it if Nell started one of her serious crying spells, and she might just do that since she would not understand a word of the conversation. His grandmother spoke only Sesotho and did not care much for those who spoke other languages. He was worried about leaving Nell in this fragile state with a disciplinarian like his grandmother. However, it seemed Dira was surviving and he was holding on to that glimmer of hope. He found them talking about the antics of his aunt's twins. Nell was looking blue and he was wondering if he had underestimated her understanding of the language, but she smiled when she saw him. He could have strangled his beloved grandmother had Nell understood what they were talking about, as that would have sent her into a panic. At the moment, she just believed her baby was overweight from all the fat cakes she had consumed since she was 4 months along. What his grandmother had said had shivers running down his spine because he knew twins ran in the family. The idea explained why her tummy had grown so much so fast and was now actually larger than Dira's. Why had the doctors not realized it? He shook his head like a cow does when trying to dispel the unwanted attentions of a fly, as though to shake the disturbing thoughts away. "Can your grandmother speak English at all?" Nell asked him in a whisper. He laughed and shook his head no. "Moatlhi, ha o ntse o duletse ho hweshetsa moo le mosetsana eo wa hao o nahana hore o tla ithuta ho bua Sesotho neng?" Moatlhi loved his grandmother, but it was hard to forget what a hard person she could be. She was a stickler for seniority and rules and tradition. She did not believe in the modern way of living where people express themselves and there was no "I am always right because I am older," or that if you are a woman, you need to speak only when spoken to. Re tshwarele hleng kgono. Re ne re sa ikemisetsa ho kgupisa. Nempa ke batla ho utlwa fela ho yena hore na o ikutlwa jwang. Re tsamaile tsela e telele ho tloha kwana polasing. Moatli looked apologetically at Nell. Dira decided to help Nell out by excusing them to go get the rooms prepared and the luggage put away. She winked at Nell when she thought their grandmother was not looking. This time, Dira did a better job of getting up, and they both waddled to the building where Moatli had dumped the bags. Moatli was left alone with his grandmother. When the two women were out of earshot, they started giggling. Your gran is one crazy lady, Dira, Nell said. You don't know the half of it. She used to make Zeko cry almost every day in the first 2 months we came here. I was too scared to say anything or try to help her. Nell was inspecting her surroundings. There were 3 rooms. The first room had 2 large sofas stationed on opposite walls with small windows above them. There were also 2 wooden chairs and a bench. The door led to one of the other rooms where a 3-quarter bed and a wardrobe were placed against one side of the room. There was a window in this room that was slightly bigger than those in the first room. There was a door giving access to the 3rd room where there was a double bed. This meant that from that room you had to go through the 2 rooms to get outside, since there was only one door leading outside. She wondered if that was where the great authoritarian slept. Where are we going to sleep? She asked Dira. Nkhono said we will be sleeping in the 2nd bedroom. There should be a double bed in there. I used to sleep in the other room, where there is a 3-quarter bed, but now she will be sleeping there. Nell was shocked and impressed. The arrangement worked out to suit the elderly lady to a T. Where is the bathroom? She asked. Dira was not sure whether to laugh or cry. Nell asked that question as though she expected the answer to be simple, like, through there. Had Moatli not told her how life was there? Do you need to go? She deflected. Well, I might, but I was asking for later when I need to use it. Dira decided to let Moatli be the one to handle that, and instead started asking her about the farm and Zeko and their father. While they talked, they unpacked and put things away in the wardrobe and the chest of drawers that was next to the double bed. Dira was wary about talking about life in the outskirts, and every time Nell steered the conversation in that direction, she deflected it. Nell realized that Dira was trying to hide something from her, and if she thought that she had not noticed how she had kept averting anything that had to do with this place, she was mistaken. Dira, you keep evading my questions about this place, and I want you to stop. What you are doing is actually freaking me out because it seems as though you are hiding something important. Now, I need to go to the bathroom. Where is it? Dira took a deep breath before answering, and Nell put her arms akimbo and glared at her. Which one do you need to do? Nell was hanging on to her last nerve and shouted, What difference does it make? The shout was so loud that Moatli and Malefa heard it, and Moatli came running into the room to referee them. What's all the shouting for, gentle ladies? He was trying for a light tone, but he could see that tensions were high. Dira spoke first. Nell o batla ho ya matlapeng. Moatli winced, and Nell's mood shifted. She sat down on the bed and started rocking. Moatli had never seen this reaction before, and so he had to take a guess at what it could mean. He came to her, and as soon as he was by her side, she grabbed his clothes at the neck and said between clenched teeth, If I do not get to a restroom in the next minute, I will have to relieve myself here. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Okay then, let's get you to the bathroom. They rose together and left the room. Dira was left alone with her thoughts, and as usual, when she was alone, those thoughts drifted to Eve. and every time her thoughts went there, a tear would follow, but only in one eye, the left one. She wondered how long it had to be before thoughts of Eve would stop hurting her in this way. She was bending down to pick up the now empty luggage bag to stow away when her grandmother came to see what they were about. Dira, ho etsahalang? Ke bone moatli ya go kgweetsa ngwana elwa a ya le yena kwana kgohlong. Dira knew that her grandmother did not care to see people crying and would just let her have it immediately if she saw what was happening. She busied herself and stayed bent with her back turned while she answered. This time Malefa did not comment on her lack of respect by not turning in her direction while answering. She was aware that Dira had some emotional baggage that she was carrying around. She knew the reason she had not wanted to look up had been because she was crying. Malefa did not remember any of her pregnancies making her this emotional. And anyway, who would have had time to be emotional with the mother-in-law she'd had? This thought caused a small shudder to course through her. She was beginning to realize that Motley's new wife was not going to be able to do the traditionally expected chores and rituals until her children were born. She knew that pushing someone who was pregnant to do some of those chores could have near fatal results. Another shudder went through her. She did not care to remember those days. It was a long time ago, and times were different now. Her mother-in-law had been a terrifying small woman, in complete contrast to her own larger frame. In all fairness, if obedience and respect had not been so deeply ingrained in her from early childhood, she would not have suffered so much at the hands of that woman. Of course, it was too late now to think of what might have been, and she had to suppress those feelings of loss and hatred that always accompanied these memories when she had them. Now, she did something that Dira had never seen her do before, and knelt down to where she was and gently wiped the tears from her eyes. Dira was very embarrassed that she had been found out and started stuttering an apology. The elderly woman gently took her by the shoulders and led her to the nearby bed. Dira did not resist. She knew better than to defy anything her grandmother wanted. Having practically raised herself, she had found it difficult to be subservient to the authority of her grandmother, and had she not seen the way Tseko had been made to bow under her authority, she might never have. Once Tseko had stopped resisting, things had gotten better, and Dira had resolved to make her stay there easier on herself by not fighting the regime.